Welcome, everyone, to Color Commentary. We are your pauper commentators, Michael Petchik and Adrian Guarzales. How's it going, Adrian?
I think you know, Mike. It's going pretty good.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. Just relaxing here on a wonderful Thursday evening. Neither of us were busy tonight, so we're recording. Let's take care of upkeep, and then let's get into this deeply nitty-gritty episode we've got planned for tonight. So this show is brought to you in part by Original Magic Art. Original Magic Art is a super cool website. They have a bunch of, neat sorts of magic paraphernalia, if you will. They have everything from playmats to tokens to dice bags to art prints, all sorts of really, really cool stuff. They recently got in some of the art from Unstable that you can now buy as art prints, but they're constantly working with official magic artists, as well as finding neat old pieces of art that they can reproduce legally because it's in the public domain. But they do really high quality products. We stand by them 100%. And if you're interested in upping the aesthetics of your game, I highly recommend them. And you can also use our affiliate code. If you go there and as you're checking out, decide to put the word commentary, spelled as in our name and in all caps, you'll get a whopping 5% off your order, and we get a little bit of a kickback. So you're getting your stuff for cheaper. Your play space is looking even nicer than usual, and you're helping keep the lights on here in the show. Adrian, what do you have for the folks this week?
Well, I'm sure you all know, I say it every week, we are on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show directly, you can also certainly do that. We won't say no. For just $1 an episode, you get to hear the full show, including our pre- and post show, and you get access to our patron-exclusive Discord channel. It's pretty sweet.
Yeah, we've definitely been having some good discussions there. As always, we're on other social media. If you have an idea for a show, a topic you'd like us to cover, or just to remind me again that Adrian is generally a little bit louder on the show and that I really should balance the audio levels better, those are good places to find us. But so today, the reason I bring this up is we received a tweet pointed at us recently from longtime fan of the show, Enrique, who wanted us, he tweeted to us, and this was on the 14th, so a few days ago. Maybe next week you can mention the few spikes of Ash Baron, Circular Logic, Battle Screech, Ponder, Preordained, Shepherd of Rot, etc. Not insane spikes, yet happening. Exciting times. So Enrique is specifically talking about paper magic because with the heightened awareness of the format, the pauper events at these GPs, the little side events that I guess I can't even call them little because the first one had 120 people at it. But there's an increased interest in the format, and as a result, MTG Finance people obviously had to get in on this, and a few cards have been going up in price. And so this is our episode where we are going to talk about budgeting for Magic, and specifically with regards to pauper. And Adrian, how do you generally buy your Magic cards? How do you approach sort of building your collection?
Well, Mike, I'm an old salt at this point, so it was mostly buying singles. I did play when a lot of these cards were legal. I started playing in M11, so that was a set with Ponder and Preordain in it. So I did have some of these cards just already lying around, but most of them I buy from my LGS. I'm fortunate to be in a town where Magic is very popular, especially Eternal formats, and so I have access to a very wide selection of singles.
Yeah, and obviously, helping support your LGS is a great thing to do, but not everyone does have that option available to them. For example, my local LGS where I go and I do play in events, not always the greatest singles collection. So generally what I will find myself doing a lot is I've used services like TCG Player. I've also used CardSphere. And there's always new options out there, but we are an Eternal format. You do not want to crack the packs that have cards that you're looking for in them because they're overpriced. And most of the packs that aren't overpriced don't have a whole lot of relevant cards in them. Anything in standard is generally not going to be a big deal. But let's sort of lead into this with what a pauper deck will cost you these days. If you're just going to a GP and you're like, hey, I think I'm going to check out pauper. I could play in one of these side events. You know, it's no skin off my back. If you're looking to play what I would consider a tier 1 pauper deck, you're looking at, you know, somewhere in the $50 to $60 range. But this episode is targeted slightly more at people who are just getting into the format and kind of want to build a collection. And so, for example, Adrian, I know you are not an absolute completionist, and you generally kind of buy things. You buy into decks, and I guess I was wondering if I could pick your brain a little bit on how you generally go about that. Like, I've seen your collection. I know it's a mess, but like when you're looking at a new deck, are you just, you know, filling out an order with your LGS and picking it all up when you get there and just sleeving it up and that's it?
No, I am fortunate in that I did play during some of the times where these decks or where these cards were being printed. So the first thing I do is I actually have already picked through my collection a couple times, and I do it every so often. And I look through my pauper box and I say, what cards do I have? Sometimes I already have 4 preordains, and in fact I did. Or I already have 4 ponders, or I already have 3 chittering rats, or whatever I need. And then, yeah, I will place an order for the rest of the cards, especially if I don't want to take them out of an existing deck. You know, I have like 5 or 6 pauper decks, and I really hate like moving cards around. So if needed, I'll just buy extra copies of cards if I need extra copies of them. But I'm in a unique position where I'm already not unique, but I'm in a good position where I'm already a very well enfranchised player. You know, I have a really great LGS, and it doesn't bother me to spend money on cards.
Yeah.
So I'm an exception.
I think that's sort of where we diverge, because my pauper collection, most cards I don't have more than a play set of. And I think this is a good time to mention, or as good a time as any. If you're playing on MitGo, you never need more than a play set. That's one of the wonderful things about the service as a whole, the program, is you can just put together deck lists, and as long as you have four copies of each card that you could play, you're set. Because obviously, you know, picking up an extra play set of, you know, if you wanted to get into, say, Boros Monarch, picking up an extra play set of Windscarred Crags when you already have one is not a big expenditure. You know, that card's about 10 cents. But if you're, for example, trying to get into that deck and you need an extra few copies of Battle Screech, you're talking about $10 instead of 40 cents. So how I personally manage my collection is I have everything sleeved up in the same sleeves, so that way I can swap things in between decks pretty easily. And for the most part, barring a few key staples, I don't generally go over more than 4 copies of it. I personally, in my collection, things that I would consider staples that can easily go in multiple decks, I generally have 2 play sets of. We're talking stuff like cantrips here. And I think that kind of dovetails us into our next sort of discussion. The cards that you probably should own if you're playing pauper. And Adrian, do you want to lead us in with those wonderful blue 1-drops that you think everyone should own?
Yeah, absolutely. So blue and red are 2 of the strongest colors in the format. As should be a surprise to nobody if you've been playing Magic for any length of time. So we really think that you need 4 copies of Preordain and 4 copies of Ponder. And sure, there are plenty of decks that don't play those cards, but if you have those 8 cantrips, you can play kind of whatever as long as you're playing them. And Pauper has a really cool legacy-like feeling like that, where there are some cards that you can just really, really, really stretch because blue is so powerful.
Yeah, and I'm just looking here from recent results. Preordain has shown up in almost a third of the decks that have gone either 5-0 or done well enough to wind up in the top 32 of a challenge. And Ponder is just a little bit behind at about 25%. So picking up a playset of each of these while not like pennies on the dollar, you're looking at somewhere around $8 for your set of preordains and about 8 for the ponders. That $16 is going to go into almost any deck that is playing blue. Like, they're just very solid pickups. You want at least a play set. Now, this is one of the tricky parts. If you're trying to construct a lot of decks at once, you will run into issues where you can't assemble them without buying more copies of these. So that's kind of why I personally have opted to sort of assemble things as necessary. I still have 2 play sets of these just because sometimes I do want to have 2 blue decks assembled at the same time, and you know, you got to face the facts on that sort of stuff. But the cantrips are very, very good. Now, in other formats, a large chunk of the cost of your deck is going to come from your lands. In Pauper, I still feel it's important for people to pick up lands that are applicable in a lot of decks. And this is by no means an extensive list. I would personally go out, grab myself a playset of each of the gain lands. These are the common dual lands that tap for one of 2 colors, ETB tapped, and you gain a life when they enter the battlefield. Then I would also say the Karus. The Karus are one of the assorted nicknames. They're also known as bounce lands. These include things like Azorius Chancery and Dimir Aqueduct. Each one of them taps for... yeah?
I would say we specifically mean the Ravnica bounce lands, yes, because the Karu cycle of these are actually really bad. We mean the Ravnica bounce lands. Yeah,
and actually, weirdly enough, even though I've always referred to them as Karus, Karu is not actually, and its brethren are not actually pauper legal. They are very bad too. But these there's a cycle of these. None of them are very expensive. A couple of them border on 50 cents. Pick them up. They're great for your mana base. Then I would say picking up copies of the artifact lands. These are getting a little pricier. You know, they're in the $2 range for some of them. There are plenty of decks that run these that have artifact synergy. Also, if you ever plan to assemble affinity, they are pretty much mandatory. Then there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which are sort of our affordable pauper fetch lands. They both tap, sacrifice, search your library for a basic, put it into play tapped. Just solid additions, let you get some fixing in there. And then finally, I'd say picking up a playset of the cycling lands from Onslaught. It's 1 for each color. It taps for one of its color, and it cycles for one of its color, and it also enters the battlefield tapped. These show up a bunch as well. The one that probably is the most important that I'd say if you are on like a really shoestring budget, pick up your Secluded Steps. The place where these see play the most is White Skyfisher decks. Are there any other lands that you'd suggest people pick up that are on the cheap side of things, Adrian?
I will say the other place I see the cycling lands a lot is in mono black. Those tend to play 4 copies of Barrenmore. And I suppose if you're in that same vein, Mortuary Mire and Bajuka Bog are 2 of the best utility lands we have in the format. Again, black lands, Mortuary Mire returns a creature from your graveyard to the top of your deck. Also incidentally good in the Skyfisher decks, and then Bajuka Bog exiles a target graveyard. So also very strong in those decks.
Now, Adrian, if I was on like a super shoestring budget here, would you recommend picking up the Guild Gates?
No, not at all. I don't think they're even that much cheaper than the game lands. I don't think there's any deck where, well, no, I take that back. I think that there are maybe 1 or 2 decks that would do this, but there are very few decks that would want to run all 4 of one game land and then plus or minus 2 or 3 copies of the Guild Gates. It's just not that common.
Yeah, I definitely rarely get a chance to use the Guild Gates, and bit of a shame. They look real nice. I really like the Plane of Ravnica, but they're definitely not a mandatory pickup. I would, if you're trying to be able to build absolutely anything, recommend that you pick them up, because there are some decks that are color intensive enough where you want to play a handful of them. So I would say that they're not completely useless. Then I would say the next thing is trying to pick up cheap sideboard cards. There's a lot of cheap and specific removal that fits only sort of into those sideboard slots. A little pricier on the little pricier end of the spectrum. You've got stuff like Hydroblast and Pyroblast that are, a couple bucks.
I do want to interject that the sideboard cards that have traditionally been very expensive, Hydroblast, Pyroblast, and Gorilla Shaman, are really at an all-time low right now. They got reprinted in Eternal Masters, and so their prices dropped. Gorilla Shaman is like a third of what it used to be because of the promo. So really, like, now is the time to buy these cards if you haven't already, or if you're just interested in building your collection, because those 3 cards probably account for like 66% of all sideboards.
Yeah, and there's sort of a cream of the crop as well when it comes to the specific removal and also conditional counter spells. A playset of Dispel, for example, is going to cost you maybe 50 cents. Playset of Electrickery is probably going to be in a similar range, maybe pushing 60 or 70. Artifact and enchantment removal tends to be pretty cheap. There's a couple of notable exceptions, but by and large, pretty affordable. And then a decent chunk of Grave Hate cards are not dreadfully expensive either. Your Fairy Macabres and your Nihil Spellbombs are all pretty affordable. So those are definitely things that I'd look into. Having the sideboard cards, while they're not relevant in the main deck, your sideboards are a little bit more homogenous between decks where, there are like a select few like best green answers to artifacts and enchantments. And if you just have a playset or 2 of those, you're probably set in a lot of cases. And also just cheap removal and counter spells are generally a good thing to pick up. But let's get into some of the pricier cards that we think are worth picking up copies of, just because they are. I think the unifying thing across these is they're all, the best in class for the most part, and you really can't compare anything else to them. And I'm going to start off with one that is getting a little pricier in paper, and that's Battle Screech. Adrian, I feel like you've probably cast Battle Screech more than me. Do you want to explain why this is a card worth picking up?
Yeah, Battle Screech is a token producer. It costs 4. You get 2 birds, and then you can tap 3 white creatures to get 2 more birds because it's got a flashback cost. And it's just very strong in a couple of different decks. Certainly the best token producer we have in the format, in my opinion. Gets played in Boros, which is a tier 1 deck, but to a lesser extent, you can also play it in like the Ralligond list, or even in like a mono white Soul Sisters type list. And I have it in foil and paper, by the way, and it is gorgeous. I'm not sure why they're so expensive. I guess Judgment's not. I mean, for one thing, it's an uncommon in real life, which might be part of it. Also, it's from an older set, Judgment. But it's very strong, and it definitely goes into good decks. So if you're interested in playing white, I would recommend picking them up.
And I will point out the reason why this card is pricey is, as you pointed out, it's only ever seen an uncommon printing. It was also printed in a small set back when we were in the 3-set paradigm for blocks, and small sets were opened a minute portion in comparison to large sets. So, and especially with the fact that under the 3-set era, the full block draft was never really super great. You kind of wound up with less of these cards winding up in the ecosystem. Next up, we've got Chainer's Edict, and this used to be an $8 card. It's down to like $4. It's still a little on the pricey side, but this, no matter how aggressive the format gets, I feel like Chainer's Edict is still a sort of signpost card where it is one of the best black removal spells. I feel like this is a pretty solid buy. I mean, even at $16 for a playset, you're going to get use out of it. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen you play black outside of a couple of decks, but I'm guessing you still probably have a playset or 2 of these.
Yeah, I got a bunch. I have them in foil too.
Ooh, I have a foil for my cube, and it is very, very pretty. Also, for those interested, I believe that the From the Vault foils are actually kind of on the cheap side for the foils, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, but they're not as nice, so don't bother.
Yeah. All right, Adrian, chain lightning. Sell me on this $3 worst lightning bolt.
The only deck you're gonna play this is in burn. If you don't want to play burn because you're a cool person, I guess. I don't know. Sorry, burn players. Not really a burn fan personally. You pick it up if you're playing burn. Otherwise, you can just let it slide. You don't need chain lightning.
Yeah, and this is one that just kind of price crept up because it was never reprinted, and it finally saw another printing in Eternal Masters, and that's the only reason it's less than a $15 card in paper, because that's how much that card was costing.
Yeah, it was a Legends card, which is also part of it. Legends is also like a small old set that like not enough got opened of. Tabernacles in that set. It's like $1,000 card. I mean, granted, it's also on the reserve list, but even Caracas was in that set as an uncommon, got reprinted, and is still like a $50 card. That's just like an expensive set all around.
Oh yeah, totally. Actually, this next one, again, this is one that I think you've probably cast more than I have. Chromatic Star is, and this is creeping up to about $3 on account of being played, I believe, mostly in Modern Tron, from what I know.
Correct.
So sell me on a $12 playset of a 1-drop artifact.
There is no replacement for this in Affinity, in Pauper, and you can even play it in like Tron, like in Pauper Tron. And the reason I say there's no replacement is because unlike Chromatic Sphere, which sure you could play, but it's nowhere near as good because this just says when it goes to the graveyard, you draw a card. So you can sacrifice it to your ATOG to pump it and draw a card. It's generally a much stronger effect. And so if you're playing Affinity, I think that you're really selling yourself short if you play Sphere over this card. And I don't even know if Sphere is really that much less expensive, honestly.
I think in paper, Sphere is pretty solidly cheaper, but I believe on MitGo they're a similar price. Now Sphere did used to see play in the Rugtron style lists, but those are not really showing up as much anymore. Next up is one of my favorite cards of all time, Counterspell, and I was shocked to learn that Counterspell still is a $1.50, so $6 for a playset. And there really is no replacement for this card. It is not the best Counterspell ever printed, but for our format, it pretty much is. There's a hand.
I mean, it's up there. Like Exclude, arguably better, but more situational. Force of Will is only good in formats where you're doing broken things. Like Force of Will and Pauper actually wouldn't be that good, in my opinion. What are you forcing? Core Skyfisher?
Yeah, I mean, we've got less sort of haymakers in the format. It's probably not as good. I'm referring to the fact that Mana Drain exists, which is a strictly better counterspell. Yeah,
you're right. I forgot about Mana Drain. That used to not be back when Mana Burn was a thing.
Yeah, we're really going to try and date ourselves with this episode, aren't we? Just really rubbing in the old man thing.
I didn't play back then.
Okay. So next up is Crop Rotation, which is $1.50, and I believe, if I remember correctly, the only place I know of that this sees play outside of a handful of Tron lists in our format is this. This is a Legacy Lands card, isn't it?
Yes, it is. In Pauper, it gets played in Tron.
Yeah,
but it's not an expensive, like. Yeah, it's a Legacy Lands card, and that makes it sound like really big and important, but it's not that expensive.
It's one of the least expensive parts of that deck because that deck is absurdly overcosted at this point. But
like a third of it is Tabernacle. Let's be real with ourselves. A third of it is one card.
Yeah. And I do want to point out Crop Rotation is kind of pretty low down on my list. That said, it is a very efficient way to ramp in certain decks and also, turn on Tron on time, which is sometimes very, very important. So, and there are a handful of like niche plays, like you can get a Colony Garden or a Sajiri Step to give something protection or get another creature out for an edict effect. So there are niche uses of it. I would not recommend picking this up right away, but I still do think it's kind of worth having them in your collection at some point. Next up, we've got Days. Days is at $2 now because it got reprinted recently. But how much is this on MitGo again?
It's also like further down. I would have to look it up. Let me see.
I want to say Days is like still in the double digits.
Yeah, it's 16 ticks. So not cheap.
No, that's $64 for a playset of a card.
Wait, hold up. That's the Jace versus Chandra version. 1 second. That's actually probably the expensive one. It's 15. I mean, still not too much off. 15 ticks for the EMA version.
All right. Now, I guess this is a point to bring up. Do you ever really need a playset of this thing? Like for one deck?
No. I think most decks, even like Mono Blue Delver, only plays like 2 of them, maybe 3. 4 is a lot. You don't need 4.
Yeah, this is one where you can probably get away with it, especially because looking at it, you're playing in decks with a lot of card draw in them anyway, so you can get to this a little bit more reliably. You don't always need to have the full 4 just so you draw into it. Now, granted, Days does get worse as the game goes on, so that also incentivizes you to play less, but this is definitely one that is expensive and is very worth it. It is the closest thing to Force of Will that we have in this format, but you don't need a full playset.
Also,
it is, yeah.
Have you ever dazed a land grant? It's beautiful.
Have you gotten to live that wonderful, wonderful dream?
Yeah, I have it on a recording. It's on one of my YouTube videos.
Oh man, that's gotta feel just amazing.
Yeah, I was like, oh, I guess I'm gonna daze this land grant. They don't have any other lands in their hand. This is awesome. I win.
Oh man, just knowing that counterspell's going to resolve and knowing that it's completely going to screw your opponent, just exquisite.
Land grant is garbage, y'all.
Yeah, it is. Next up, Expedition Map. And this is another $2 Modern Tron card. Do you wanna try and sell me on this one, Adrian?
Again, you need it for pauper Tron. Because assembling Tron, even though we're not like a turbo Tron deck, it is still very important because that's how you generate most of your advantage in the game, is having so much more mana than your opponent. So yeah, you need it. You need it for the deck.
Yeah. And again, there really is no sort of substitute for this that's as efficient. Most of the other things that tutor lands at common can't get any land. They're mostly basic lands. And as a result, like, there's just no substitute for this. If you want to play a Marasa Tron deck, this is usually only a 1 to 2 of in those lists. But this is something where you'd rather have 4 copies of this than not, because it's kind of tricky to reprint. And we just visited Zendikar, which is the Lands Matter plane, so I can't imagine us going back anytime soon. I would recommend picking up copies of this. So here's another MitGo expensive card, Gorilla Shaman, which you brought up early in the show. This is what, like $5-6 now online?
Yeah, it's 6 ticks. It used to be like 15 or 20. So really, it got a promo reprint, a very beautiful promo actually. I traded mine out, and it's much cheaper now. So definitely recommend picking those up if you haven't already.
Yeah, and this kind of goes to our argument or our discussion earlier about picking stuff up for your sideboards. I will note, in paper, this thing is 50 cents. Just go pick up a playset. It's very cheap. It's
from Alliances. It has like 5 print. I mean, not really, but 2 printings in that set. So yeah, very, very cheap on paper.
Yeah. Next up is Gush, which recently has gone up in price quite a bit. It's $4 to $5 for copies of this thing. And do you want to tell us why someone would be interested in picking up a $4 to $5 card for Pauper?
It goes in, I want to say, no less than 3 tier 1 decks, both versions of Delver, and then it's a 4 of, I believe, yeah, I'm pretty sure it's a 4 of. Sorry, I'm showing that I haven't been playing on Moto as much lately. In the Tribe combo deck, yeah, it's got to be a 4 of in that deck, right? So it goes into 3 tier 1 decks, if not more than that, and is a busted card. Like, it's so strong, and we've said it on the show before. It's the Gush archetype is currently one of the best decks in the format. I think we've said it before. You're either playing a Gush deck, you're playing Tron, or you're playing a Monarch deck, or maybe you're playing like one of the random aggro decks. But those 3 decks are really the tier 1 lists right now.
Yeah, this is a very solid buy. I understand like sticker shock for some folks on this one, but Gush is there's no other card that draws you 2 cards for free. Next we've got Oubliette, which is the most expensive in paper like pauper staple, if you will. Now Oubliette is a conditional. It's pretty much a worse Journey to Nowhere, but it has 2 black pips on it, so it counts towards Gray Merchant. This is a bit of price memory from when Mono Black was really good. This was one of the first things that when Pauper kind of had some rumblings a couple years ago about gaining popularity, this was something that speculators bought out very quickly. How many Oubliettes do you think you actually need to have like a competent collection for playing Pauper, Adrian?
2, but I do own 4.
I actually own 0. I did not get in at $8 and kind of regret that, but you know,
I may or may not have traded fetch lands for mine. YOLO.
Whoo. A power move here from Mr. Gorzaz. All right. Next, we're actually going to talk about some lands, the Tron lands, and the cheapest I could find these online was $2 a pop. And these vary incredibly much in terms of cost between printings, because I don't know if you looked at what an Antiquities set of these cost, but it's getting up there now, dude.
I mean they're good. I actually don't own I'm missing like 1 mine or something like stupid. Like I actually don't have a full playset of Tron lands.
Oh man. I'll make fun of you for that off the show, but so at $2 a pop, you do need all 12. Almost every Tron list I've ever seen runs the full 12. I've seen proposed lists that run a little bit less, but you do really want the full 12. It is $24 for all these, but without them, you cannot play Tron. And I do think that is one of the key super archetypes in Pauper right now. And I would highly recommend picking these up. You know, you're never going to need really more than 1 playset. So $24, not the end of the world, at least personally, but definitely worth picking up. Do you want to tackle our one of our other recent spikes, another colorless land?
Yeah, Ash Barrens. It's only in a Commander product, so of course it's expensive. $7 each, worth it. Some people argue that it's only marginally better than Terramorphic or Evolving Wilds, and sure, like at face value, maybe not, but I think people are really underselling that you can cycle and play the land in the same turn, which is really huge for the decks that play this card. Most specifically, I'm thinking of Izzet Delver being able to spend a blue to cycle this and turn it into a mountain on the same turn when they need that. So really worth its value. I think it's the best quote unquote fetch land in the format. So I think it's worth it. And let's be real. Like, we're talking about being on a shoestring budget and all that, and I do know that that's an appeal of Pauper, but the deck that plays this is $120, and that's like half your mana base in Modern or 1 card in Legacy. So you really are still getting a lot of value.
Yeah, and this is definitely something that God, I don't want to say this because if it doesn't happen, then I look like an idiot, but I think this is going to be reprinted in the not too distant future. It's a good card. It's good for the formats it's legal in. I mean, I guess Legacy less so, and Vintage, obviously, it's not even close, but this is something that people play in Commander. I've seen it there. It's played in Pauper. It's only a matter of time before this sees a reprint. If you're not playing Izzet Delver, you probably don't need this. It does help fix your mana in a lot of decks, but I would not say this is mandatory, but if you've got the money to spare for it, this is a very good pickup. I will also note, this was like $2 when it came out. I will highly recommend whenever a supplementary set is coming out, if you see something that you think could be good and it's cheap and within your budget, just pick up a playset or 2 of it. It's it's so worth it not to get screwed over when selling spikes. Like, you're probably not spending more than you would 2 months than you're not spending considerably more than you would waiting 2 months. And in case it goes up, you haven't lost anything here. Next is Relic of Progenitus, and this is a $4 card. This is a great piece of graveyard hate. And Adrian, why should someone care about Relic?
It's like you said, it's a great piece of graveyard hate, arguably one of the best in the format. The other two are the main deckable Bojuka Bog, depending on your deck. So, your mileage might vary. Also, Nihil Spellbomb is the other widely played card. But, I mean, Relic will just, like, I guess you can play Tormod's Crypt too, but whatever. But these other cards, they're one shot or they're sorcery speed in the case of Bojuka Bog. So you don't have something where every turn you just whittle away your opponent's graveyard if that's the strategy they're on, and then at a moment's notice you can just blow it up if you have to. So it is a very, very strong card. For most of the decks out there, it is the best option. And also it's played in Modern, which I think is a trend we're seeing with a lot of these cards. So yeah, definitely worth its value.
Yeah. Also worth noting, this is completely colorless, so it can go in literally any deck you need it to. It does have the drawback of it will exile your graveyard as well, so it doesn't play nice with graveyard decks. But if you're on, again, that absolute shoestring budget and you have black, you've got other options. Skipping ahead a little bit here. I want to talk about Nettle Sentinel. So Nettle Sentinel is like $3 and change. And this is a Stompy and Elves card. This is something that is ripe for a reprint. I just, if you want to play one of those two decks, you absolutely need it. Just pick it up. It's never going to get worse. And I doubt they're printing a better version of Nettle Sentinel at Common anytime soon. But, it sees play in 2 tier 1 decks. Pick it up. Anything else you want to add on Nettle Sentinel?
It's a good card, and again, it's expensive because it's in other formats.
Yeah. Next up, we've got Tangle, which has climbed up to about $3. Adrian, do you have any opinions on Tangle?
It's good. It sees plays in Turbo Fog. I actually don't know why it's that expensive. But I do want to talk about Moments Peace, which is the other $3 fog, main deckable in Tron, sometimes even as a 4 of. So between the two of those, you definitely have some good fog options. But I think no matter what, if you're going to have to pay the premium if you want to run the good fogs. Otherwise, you're just running plain fog, and it's not very good.
Is Moments Peace really $3?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Looked it up.
Yeah, online it's a 3-ticket card, and it's $1.50 in paper. Goodness.
Oh, I got those mixed up. Sorry about that.
No. We're all good. Rounding out our green cards here and sort of the end of the list for good playable cards that are a little on the pricier side of things is Kyrian Ranger. This is, again, Elves and Stompy both play this deck. There is nothing in our format that comes close to this.
This is the reason Elves can run 13 lands, or one of them.
Yeah.
And Stompy can run few lands too.
Yeah, this thing lets you double up on land drops if necessary. Helps you keep things back for defense. Helps Elves with its combo turns. This thing is just very good. And also worth noting, it's again a difficult thing to reprint. So I would pick these up. It's $8 for the playset. They're not printing a better version of this, and if they reprint this, you're not out a whole lot of money. And if they reprint it, go pick up some extra copies. This thing is not. This thing isn't like an evergreen thing. They don't need to print this sort of effect in every block set or even once a decade. Like, this is a very good card, and it's not going to get cheaper. I do want to also talk, though, about cards that are expensive and not worth it. And I do want to lead things off by talking about 3 Visits. This is a Portal 3 Kingdoms card. It is $45 for this common. You don't need 3 Visits ever. It's just nature's lore. The only reason it's this expensive is because of Commander. Don't do it. But Adrian, I want you to sort of give me some feedback on the card Ristic Study. This is a Commander All-Star. It is climbed and climbed and climbed because of a lack of reprint, because it uses an unpopular mechanic for an unpopular set. Why don't I need copies of Ristic Study?
Ristic Study goes in exactly one deck in the format. It's called Ristic Tron. And it basically abuses the fact that your opponent doesn't want to have to pay for this. The Ristic effect. I think it also plays Ristic Circle. It's just not a very good Tron deck. I mean, sure. I know one guy who went split at Pats with it, but it's just really not a very strong contender in the meta. It's only expensive because of Commander, and you don't need it unless you're just absolutely married to the idea of playing Ristic Tron, in which case budget might not be your primary concern.
Yeah, you really don't need any copies of this unless you're playing Commander, in which case it's a very good card there, and go for it. Next up, we've got Street Wraith, and again, Modern rears its ugly head. Street Wraith is a $7 card. Its most notable trait is that it cycles for 2 life. Now, this does see play in a pauper deck. I think I've only ever seen it in one very specific deck. You do not need another copy of Gataxian Probe that doesn't let you see your opponent's hand.
Yeah, and I think the deck you're thinking of specifically is oh god, why can't I say the name? I've been cursed. It's that bad Storm deck we always dog on that's not Vine Storm. One Land Spy.
One Land Spy.
Yeah, it's One Land Spy, and it's just to fill up the graveyard and draw some new cards. But yeah, you don't need it.
Yeah. Next up, Manamorphose, and why is this card expensive, Adrian?
Again, I think it's because of Modern. It has seen 2 printings. It was uncommon the second time and a common the first time. I think it's really just that it's a popular card. It gets played in Storm, in Modern. It is a good card, just not in our format, which doesn't really care about the filter/draw effect as much. Because we're not cheating it out with like Goblin Electromancer or Baral, Chief of Compliance, or anything.
Yeah, and I definitely have seen this run a couple of times in Black-Red Reanimator decks where you need to be able to hit your mana requirements very quickly, but this is a pretty hard pass for me. Again, another example of quick mana not necessarily being game breaking. Lotus Petal. This is pricey because of a couple of decks in Legacy. This is sees play in Reanimator shells. It sees play in Sneak and Show shells. This thing is just not that great in Pauper. Again, the only place I've seen this, One Land Spy. Are there any other uses for this thing?
No, and I think we'll find that true as we go further down this list, is these are commons that are purely expensive because of other formats.
Yeah. Now, let me talk about this. There's some modern staple cantrips in here. So Sleight of Hand and Serum Visions both see widespread play in Modern. Why are these down here in this list?
Because we have Ponder and Preordain, which, because they are played in less formats, actually cost less, which is hilarious, even though they are the better spell. The same is true, by the way, for Strip Mine and Wasteland. Even though Strip Mine is objectively a better land, for killing your opponent's lands, it is like pennies on the dollar because it's banned everywhere except for Commander and Vintage, where it is restricted.
Yeah, and that's definitely something to keep an eye on. When stuff gets banned out of other formats because it's too good, if it stays in Pauper, those cards get cheap. Gataxian Probe used to be a $4 card. It's now like $1.50. Like, these things do have a very real tangible effect on card prices. Rounding out our list of like cards that are pricey and not worth buying, Simian Spirit Guide, Spreading Seas, and Devoted Druid. These are modern cards. Spreading Seas just doesn't have the punch with the lack of, a Merfolk deck that Modern has. Devoted Druid doesn't have the other half of the combo piece that goes infinite with it. And Adrian, what is the best case scenario for a Simian Spirit Guide?
I guess you power out You go sandstone needle, tap for 2 red, Simian Spirit Guide, Avarax. I don't know. I can't think of one.
Yeah, you had to jump through a couple of hoops there just to get to something that's decent. And we did have one contentious one that we had on this list, Ancient Stirrings, and you actually advocated for this being something that someone might want to buy even at a couple bucks a pop.
It's not bad in Tron. There are certainly Tron lists that use it, so I'm not willing to just totally write it off. Plus, it's only $2. It's not that expensive. If you're playing Tron, like you might want it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I had it in a no buy just because we haven't seen the Tron decks that can really abuse this. The Rug Tron, the traditional star playset of stars, playset of spheres, trying to just power out a Nulamog's Crusher. That kind of style of Tron has kind of dried up a lot in recent years. So for me, I just don't see enough decks where it's super applicable. Worth noting, this thing does find you lands, so that was part of the big appeal of it in those Tron decks back in their heyday. So again, it's not completely useless, but it's just not something I'd prioritize personally. Now, in terms of once you've started to delve into Pauper, these collections. So I touched earlier on buying stuff as soon as it comes out. Adrian, when you see something that you think might be Pauper playable, when's your like strike zone for that? When do you want to kind of buy into the new hotness?
On Moto, I buy it immediately. I don't wait on Moto. In Paper, I wait till I'm going to play the deck. I play a lot less Paper than I do Moto, and on Moto the cards are very readily accessible, whereas in Paper Pats might not have the card yet or what have you. So generally online I pull the trigger pretty much immediately, which is how I got my Ash Barons so cheap, and same with my Monarch cards. But in Paper I tend to wait a lot longer.
Yeah, and I think it is worth pointing out that buying in early sometimes presents a risk of, if the card winds up not being great, you might lose some money. If the card winds up getting reprinted, you might lose some money. But
yeah, I spent like $7 each on my Entourage of Tress. They're like $2 now on Moto.
Yeah, that one didn't pan out quite so well. But the thing here is, if you really want to play a bunch of Pauper, if you're one of the more enfranchised people, or you start playing the format and you find that you really love it, a lot of these cards, if they go down a little bit. And admittedly, like when new sets come out every couple sets, I do place an order on TCG Player for like $5 of stuff that I might play in Pauper. A lot of it I never play, but I'm also, making sure that if one of these cards spikes up to, I don't know, $7 for a thing that came out of a Commander set, I've got my playset and I'm pretty content with that. And I think that's generally how I wind up personally saving a bunch of money playing Pauper, is just getting in at the ground level. Now, once someone has collected all these things, Adrian, how do you store all your cards?
I don't want to talk about it, but they are in a box, stuffed willy-nilly, and then they are stuffed onto a shelf where they wait for me to look for them in a hurry 5 minutes before I have to go to F&M.
I appreciate your candor in this moment, because I'm definitely the more obsessive of the two of us when it comes to this stuff. I have all my stuff in boxes. I have it all sorted by color and card type. Do what suits you. Honestly, like, don't feel the need to hyper organize everything. It will help you if you're doing something like I do, where I have about a playset of everything. When I take something out of a deck, it goes back in the box in alphabetical order. And that way, when I'm going to build a deck, I know as I'm flipping through stuff, all right, I've hit the correct letter in the correct section. It's not here. I don't have any, or they're in use somewhere else. So personally, I love that because it helps me save time when I'm trying to put stuff together. But yeah, go out there, get yourself some Pauper cards. Even if you just want to get one deck, just go out and get it. The format's not getting any cheaper. These cards aren't getting any cheaper. These staples will stay relevant. There are very few of these that have become completely irrelevant. I guess the closest I could come up with is Kumbaj Witches, which is dropped off online sharply and was never pricey in paper to begin with. So I guess, Adrian, do you have any other things about budgeting for this format?
If you are playing another format and you decide to get into Pauper, we've run the numbers before. It'll cost you as much to buy the entire format as it would to buy a deck in Legacy. So you really are getting a lot of deck value by buying into the format. And I think that there are some people who, and I'm not trying to knock people, budgets are different, people's lives are different, but you're not going to get a cheaper way of playing Magic than playing Pauper. One of these Pauper decks, $60, that's like 4 drafts. You can afford, if you want to play Magic and you want to play competitively, I cannot think of a better way to play on a budget.
Yeah, this is a format, like there is one format out there that I think is cheaper, and that's Penny Dreadful, and that is
it's not a real format, Mike.
Well, that's where I was going with this. It's not a format that receives any sort of widespread support. And on top of that, you're dealing with issues of fluctuating card prices determine legality. Pauper doesn't ban stuff for being too expensive. It doesn't ban stuff when it rotates. It doesn't generally need to ban cards at all. It just kind of exists. The metagame develops. Your cards are likely still going to be worth a similar amount in a couple years, if not more. It's just, in my mind, a very solid investment as a player. If you're, looking to speculate on cards, you may have tuned into the wrong podcast. I apologize. We maybe should have clarified that, but this is definitely more about trying to budget yourself. And obviously, don't spend more than you should on your hobbies. But if you're just looking for a good time, I can't think of another format where the deck currently sitting at the number 1 spot in the metagame is just under $50, which is, if you're going out to the movies and you're grabbing a popcorn while you're there, you're probably getting pretty close to that unless you got a real cheap movie theater near you. And just
Mike and I are confirmed elitist spikes.
Oh yeah, 100%. I'm looking, and out of the standard metagame, now mind you, this is standard. This is a rotating format. The closest cost is a mono black aggro deck at 96 American dollars to purchase today that will rotate. And while sure, it does contain a couple cards that won't depreciate in value, I have a hard time believing Glint Sleeve Siphoner is going to be worth what, $3 in a couple years, but I've been wrong before.
Yeah.
All right. I think we've covered everything about sort of personal finance when it comes to the format of Pauper. Is there anything else you want to add, or you ready to take us out of the show, Adrian?
I'll take us out to the ball game. Well, everyone, thanks for joining us today. This podcast is brought to you with the support of our patrons. Please consider supporting us if you like the show. You can check below this video or the description of this podcast for details on where to find us. We'd like to remind you, if you're listening to this on a platform with reviews, they're always appreciated because they boost our visibility. If you've got a deck list or idea for a topic, you can contact us either via our website or by emailing us directly at colorcommentary@gmail.com. Special thanks to our LGSs, Pat's Games and JP Comics, and of course, the ever musical L. You can find our theme song, Quantitative, and other great tracks over on his SoundCloud, soundcloud.net/ELLELLELL. Till next week, this is Adrian and Mike, and we are signing off for Color Commentary.